Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's 2020 Self-Nomination Application Demo webinar. CMS will provide an overview of the 2020 MIPS self-nomination process for the vendors interested in becoming Qualified Clinical Data Registries, QCDRs, and Qualified Registries for the Quality Payment Program. During the webinar, CMS will also share a live demonstration of the self-nomination application and the QCDR measure submission template. After the webinar, CMS will take as many questions as time allows. Now, I will turn it over to Sylvia Sugamore, Health Insurance Specialist from the Center for Clinical Standards and Quality at CMS. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today for our 2020 self-nomination webinar and demo. The attendant audience for this specific webinar are those third-party intermediaries or vendors that are looking to become either a qualified clinical data registry or a qualified registry. We do want to note that this webinar is not intended for the individual eligible clinician or a small practice. We will be going through our criteria to become a QCDR or qualified registry and what CMS expects of those entities wishing to self-nominate as a qualified registry or a QCDR. And then we will actually provide a live demo in terms of the new system. We are transitioning from our old system to a new system, and we would like to provide a demo of that and how you can complete the application. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Qualified Registry and QCDR team. They help support this work with us and are really in the weeds of going through and reviewing these applications and also providing that direct communication with our QCDRs and registries. If the communication is not coming from us, it's coming from them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hector from the QCDR registry team to start us off. Thank you all.
Oh, thanks, Sophia. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right. So I'll be going over some over the agenda. So today we'll be going over some self-nomination information. Also, Anastasia will be doing a self-nomination demonstration on the new 2020 self-nomination form. And then we'll also provide some QCDR measure submission template information. And Jocelyn will be doing a demonstration on the 2020 QCDR measure submission template, and then we'll wrap it up with some resources and who to contact, as well as a Q&A session at the end. Next slide. Next slide, please. Back one. Thank you. So as some of you may be aware, the QCDR, or Qualified Clinical Data Registry definition, has changed for 2020. It's been updated. The new definition is that a QCDR is defined as an entity that demonstrates clinical expertise in medicine and quality measure development that collects medical or clinical data on behalf of MIPS-eligible clinicians to track patients and diseases and foster improvement in the quality of care provided to patients. Next slide. A QCDR may include an entity with clinical expertise in medicine. Please note that clinicians must be on staff with the organization and lend their clinical expertise in the work carried out by the organization as a QCDR. It may also include an entity with standalone quality measurement development, an entity that collects medical or clinical data on behalf of a MIPS-eligible clinician for the purpose of patient and disease tracking to foster improvement in the quality of care provided to patients, and an entity that uses an external organization for purposes of data collection, calculation, or transmission may meet the definition of a QCDR, as long as the entity has a signed written agreement that specifically details the relationship, roles, and responsibility of the entity with the external organization effective as of September 1st of the year prior to the year which the entity seeks to become a QCDR. For the 2020 self-nomination period, that written agreement must be effective as of September 1st, 2019. Next slide. Entities without clinical expertise in medicine and quality measure development that want to become a QCDR may collaborate with entities with such experience. Entities may seek to qualify as another type of third-party intermediary, such as a qualified registry. Becoming a qualified registry does not require the level of measure development expertise that is needed to be a QCDR that develops measures. Next slide. A qualified registry is defined as a medical registry, a maintenance of certification program operated by a specialty body of the American Board of Medical Specialties or other data intermediary that, with respect to a particular performance period, has self-nominated and successfully completed a vetting process to demonstrate its compliance with the MIPS qualification criteria specified by CMS. Like a QCDR, a qualified registry is a vendor that collects clinical data from an individual MIPS-eligible clinician, group, or virtual group and submits it to CMS on their behalf. Clinicians work directly with their chosen qualified registry to submit data on the selected measures or specialty set of measures they have picked. Next slide. There are two main differences between the qualified registry and QCDR reporting mechanisms. The first difference is that QCDRs are not limited to reporting only MIPS quality measures, as they may submit a maximum of 30 QCDR measures for CMS consideration for the 2020 performance period of MIPS. Qualified registries are not able to submit QCDR measures for consideration or support QCDR measures. The second difference is that data submitted by a QCDR is not eligible for the Eligible Measure Applicability Process, or EMA. MIPS-eligible clinicians submitting through a QCDR would not receive a denominator reduction. Next slide. When self-nominating to act as a qualified registry or QCDR, organizations attest to meeting the requirements set forth by the calendar year 2019 Physician Fee Schedule Final Rule for the Quality Payment Program, which finalized the vendor requirements for the 2020 MIPS performance period. Failure to meet these requirements may affect your ability to participate as a qualified registry or QCDR for future MIPS performance periods. Qualified registries or QCDRs that withdraw for any reason during the performance period will be terminated as a third-party intermediary as a qualified registry or QCDR for future MIPS performance periods. A qualified registry or QCDR and its system must be implemented and able to accept data should a clinician, group, or virtual group wish to submit data on the approved MIPS quality measures and or QCDR measures by January 1st, 2020. Next slide. You must have at least 25 participants by January 1st, 2019. These participants are not required to use the QCDR or qualified registry to report MIPS data to CMS, but they must submit data to the QCDR or qualified registry for quality improvement. During the data submission period, you must certify that some data submissions are true, accurate, and complete to the best of your knowledge. This certification includes the acceptance of data exports directly from an EHR or other data sources. If you become aware that any submitted information is not true, accurate, and complete, you will correct such issues promptly prior to submission and understand that the knowing omission, misrepresentation, and falsification of any submitted information may be punished by criminal, civil, or administrative penalties, including fines, civil damages, and or imprisonment. You must include quality measure results and data on Medicare and non-Medicare beneficiaries as applicable. Next slide. You must submit data via CMS-specified secure method for data submission, such as a defined quality payment program data format. Additional information regarding data submission methodologies can be found in the Developer Tools section of the Resource Library of the Quality Payment Program website, as listed on the slide. You're also required to provide performance category feedback at least 4 times a year to all MIPS-eligible clinician groups and virtual groups they are reporting for. Please note CMS does not provide a template for the performance feedback reports. If a real-time feedback dashboard is available to clinicians, CMS asks that the qualified registry or QCDR email clinicians, groups, and virtual groups at least 4 times a year to remind them the feedback is available. Next slide. You must verify and maintain clinician information, business associate agreements, and clinician consents. Verification of clinician names, contact information, costs, charged to the clinicians, services provided, and quality measures such as MIPS quality measures and or QCDR measures, or specific measure sets if applicable. Business associate agreements with clinicians or groups who provide patient-specific data must comply with HIPAA privacy and security rules. Clinician consent given to the qualified registry or QCDR to submit results and data to CMS for MIPS. Next slide. As communicated in the calendar year 2019 physician fee schedule final rule for the quality payment program, and also included in the 2020 qualified registry and QCDR fact sheets, which will be posted soon, support call attendance is mandatory, and unexcused absences will result in remedial action being taken against the vendor, up to and including termination of the qualified registry or QCDR. Each qualified registry or QCDR must have at least one representative in attendance on every support call. This applies to organizations that are supporting multiple qualified registries or QCDRs, as one person in attendance will only count for one qualified registry or QCDR. Support call attendance is tracked via WebEx. Upon joining the WebEx, qualified registries or QCDRs will be asked to join the attendees to provide the attendee's first name, last name, and vendor name. Next slide. Each qualified registry or QCDR must attend both the webinar and audio portion to receive credit for attending the support call. After self-nomination, the MIPS QCDR/registry support team, or the PIMS team, maintains a distribution list that was developed based on contacts provided in the self-nomination form. Additional contacts can be added to this distribution list at any time by submitting their request to the MIPS QCDR/registry support team. Please note that all qualified registries or QCDRs must have at least 2 different contacts on this distribution list. Next slide. During self-nomination, you must thoroughly explain your process for validation of data submitted on behalf of individual MIPS-eligible clinicians, groups, and virtual groups through the development of a data validation plan. You're required to provide the following as part of your data validation plan: the name of your QCDR or qualified registry, process of verifying quality payment program eligibility for MIPS-eligible clinician groups and eligible groups, process of verifying accuracy of TIN or MPIs, process of calculating reporting and performance rates, process of verifying that your system will only accept data for purposes of MIPS on 2020 MIPS clinical quality measures, ECQMs, or QCDR measures if you're a QCDR. Process used for completion of a randomized audit, and process used for completion of a detailed audit. Your data validation plan will be reviewed by CMS as a part of your self-nomination application and will need CMS approval prior to its implementation for the performance period. Next slide. You must also execute your 2020 data validation plan and provide us with the results. Please note that for 2020, the execution of your data validation plan must be completed prior to the 2020 performance period data submission period, so errors can be corrected prior to data submission. The 2020 data validation execution report that includes the results of your audit must be submitted to CMS by May 31st of 2021. Please note, a late submission of your data validation execution report from your QCDR or qualified registry will be seen as noncompliance with program requirements and may result in remedial action or termination of the QCDR or qualified registry in future program years. If you do not submit data for the 2020 performance period, if you do not submit quality data for the 2020 performance period, you may also submit an email letting us know that a data validation execution report was not needed because you did not submit any quality data for an eligible clinician group or virtual group for 2020. For purposes of qualified registry and QCDR participation, we do not require that you provide a written report on promoting interoperability or improvement activities. However, we encourage QCDRs and qualified registries to utilize auditing processes to ensure the accuracy of all data submissions under the promoting interoperability and improvement activities performance categories. QCDRs and qualified registries certify at the time of submission that the data submitted for all performance categories is true, accurate, and complete to the best of their knowledge. Next slide. The following items should also be addressed or included in the 2020 Data Validation Execution Report: the name of your QCDR qualified registry, the results of verifying MIPS eligibility of clinicians, groups, or virtual groups, such as any issues identified when determining if the clinician groups or virtual groups met the MIPS eligibility criteria, and please provide details and examples regarding the identified issues and how they were resolved. The results of verifying the accuracy of TINs or MPIs, again, please provide details and examples regarding any identified issues and how they were resolved. Next slide. You should include results of verifying that 2020 MIPS quality measure specifications and/or QCDR measures, if your QCDR with approved QCDR measures for the 2020 performance period. Specifications are utilized for submission. Again, if there are any issues identified when you're verifying these specifications, please provide details and examples regarding the identified issues and how they were resolved. Also, provide results of calculating data completeness and performance rates. And if there are any issues that are identified, please provide details and examples, again, for these identified issues and how they were resolved. Also, results of the randomized audit should be provided or included in your data validation execution report. If there were any data issues identified, again, please provide details and examples regarding the identified issues. And we ask that you be as specific as possible with any identified issues throughout the data validation execution report. For example, if you find a logic issue when verifying the quality measure specifications, please let us know exactly what the issue was in the logic that caused the error. And lastly, results of the detailed audit. Provide details and examples regarding how the identified data issues were resolved. Please note that the detailed audit is required. It is not optional, but it is required if errors are found through the randomized audit. This does include any error rate above 0%. So again, if any data issues are identified regardless of the error rate, error type, if it falls within a 95% confidence interval, or if you deem the error to be insignificant, that is not criteria to not provide results of the detailed audit. Again, to clarify, if there are any issues or errors identified throughout the data validation execution report or when you run your data validation plan, a detailed audit is required. Next slide. Data inaccuracies that affect MIPS-eligible clinicians may result in remedial action that may be taken against your QCDR or qualified registry due to the low data quality rating, and will have the QCDR qualified registry qualified posting updated for the performance period of MIPS to indicate the QCDR's or qualified registry data error rate on the CMS website until the data error rate falls below 3% and that remedial action has been taken against the QCDR qualified registry. Data inaccuracies affecting more than 5% of your total MIPS eligible clinicians may lead to termination of the QCDR qualified registry for future program years. CMS will evaluate each quality measure for data completeness and accuracy. The vendor will also attest that the data, quality measures, improvement activities, and promoting interoperability objectives and measures results submitted are true, accurate, and complete to the best of their knowledge. Next slide. CMS may take, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. CMS will determine error rates calculated on data submitted to CMS for MIPS-eligible clinicians. CMS will evaluate data inaccuracies, including but not limited to TIN NPI issues such as incorrect TINs or NPIs, formatting issues such as submitting files with incorrect file formats or submitting files with incorrect element formats or failure to update or resubmit rejected files, calculation issues such as inaccurate qualities for measure elements, performance rates, and/or data completeness rates, or numerator being larger than the denominator, and data audit discrepancies. Since data audits are required to occur prior to data submission, QCDRs and qualified registries should correct all identified errors prior to submitting the data to CMS. QCDRs and qualified registry acknowledgement of data discrepancies found post-submission from clinician feedback reports. Next slide. CMS may take remedial action for failing to meet applicable criteria for approval or submit data that is inaccurate, unusable, or otherwise compromised. Failure to comply with the remedial action process may lead to termination of third-party intermediaries for the current and/or subsequent performance year. Next slide. If remedial action is applied, CMS will require that the QCDR or qualified registry take internal remedial action by submitting a corrective action plan to address any deficiencies or issues and prevent them from recurring. The corrective action plan must be received by CMS within 14 calendar days from the date of the CMS remedial action notification for CMS review and approval. Failure to comply with the remedial action process may lead to termination of third-party intermediaries for the current and/or subsequent performance year. As you can see on the slide, we've taken a screenshot of what the qualified posting would look like for such a vendor. Next slide. And now I will turn it over to Anastasia Robin for the self-nomination form demonstration.
Thanks, Hector. Bear with me one moment while I share my screen. So we will be doing a live demo of the self-nomination tool for 2020. With that being said, it looks like you should be now seeing my screen. So what you want to do to access the new self-nomination tool is actually navigate to the Quality Payment Program website on the cms.gov site. As you can tell here, it is the qpp.cms.gov website. With that, you'll go to the Sign In on this page, and you'll navigate here to the Login, which requires a QPP account. If you already have a QPP account, you may be able to use that account. It may be possible that you need an additional role. So as you attempt to do so, those steps will kind of be played out. But if you do have an account, you can certainly log in using your username and password that's existing. If for some reason you do not already have a HARP account, you can certainly go ahead and register for a new account. There is information right on this page. Just click to the next tab here that says Register, and you can register for a QPP account. You'll also see that there is helpful information, what happens next, as well as if you click Register with HARP or learn more about the account, you can navigate to a window that actually shows all sorts of helpful information about what the account is, how to create an account, how to enter personal information, and so on. Now, in the interest of time today, we aren't going to go through the process of creating one of those accounts. We do have SMEs on the phone that can answer questions related to those, so if you do have questions, feel free to ask them. But we won't go step-by-step within the call today to make sure you know how to. If for some reason you have any issues obtaining an account, feel free to contact our service center. We'll provide that information a little later in the call, and somebody can help you get that account as well during that process. So there is resources available to help get that account if you don't already have it. But again, if you do have it, feel free to use your information to log in. As you log in, you will come up with a screen similar to this, depending on what type of access you have. Now, the self-nomination information will actually be located underneath Manage Access. So if you click the Manage Access, you'll see an extra little link here that pops up that's listed Registry and QCDR Self-Nomination. If you do click that, you'll see that you've entered the self-nomination window. Now, I'm here in a test site for the purpose of today's demo, so you may see, obviously, a little bit of differences that will occur between what I'm seeing here and what you'll see in your page. For example, obviously, you'll see that there's 20 days left here until the self-nomination period opens on July 1st. Of course, it closes July 3rd, and so on. So we'll go ahead and get started navigating through the actual self-nomination tool here now that we've entered into it. If you are an existing vendor that is in good status for 2019, you will find that your pre-filled simplified form will be available here as long as you do have the HARP account associated and whatnot. With that being said, if you don't, you can certainly click this helpful link right here that says Vendor Not Listed, and that will give you some additional resources as to how to find your information or how to request the appropriate security official role to be able to access that or find your particular registry. If you will have access to a simplified form, the PIMS team will be notifying those 2019 vendors in good status via email to let you know that you do have a simplified form out there. Please be sure to use that. I know last year we had a lot of duplicate self-nominations created as some vendors were not aware a simplified form existed, and we of course hate for you guys to do the extra work if you don't need to. So if you are a good status, definitely feel free to reach out to us if for some reason you can't find yours or need that email resent. Moving on to the next section here, you can see here that I've got a couple created here just for the purpose of today's call. If you are a new vendor or a vendor that does not have access to a simplified form, you will need to add a new vendor manually here. You'll see that within that add new vendor, it'll create a pop-up screen to create that new vendor. You'll enter your vendor ID name or your vendor name here. To note here, I do want to let you point out these helpful hints that are throughout the self-nomination tool. As you can see here, the vendor name that's populated here will be displayed on the qualified posting. So you do want to make sure that you type in exactly what you want publicly posted within that field. And then the next section on this little pop-up is whether you're trying to self-nominate as a qualified registry or a QCDR. With that being said, if you would like to participate as both, separate self-nominations are required. So please select the one self-nomination type you'd like to create for this particular self-nomination you're working on. If you'd like to be both, again, you'd have to come back and start a new one with the other vendor type at that point in time. But as I mentioned earlier, we will go ahead and use these samples I have created here for the purpose of this demo today. So I do have a couple of different options here. The first one, an existing QCDR, and then I've added a couple of new ones as well, just for the purpose of demoing today. You'll see that this existing self-nomination I have here is 81% complete. Many of the simplified forms will be in the higher percentages because a lot of that information is already pre-populated for you. But of course, as things can change from year to year, we definitely require that every vendor go through every field on that simplified form to make sure the information is accurate. We hate for email addresses to have changed, contacts, measure information, or anything to that effect changed and it not get changed in the self-nomination. So please make sure to review all self-nominations. Moving forward then, we do have the new ones, the newer self-nominations as well. As you can tell here, only 2% is complete at this point in time, and that's purely because I've only added the name right here. So if you're a vendor creating a new self-nomination, you'll find that most of the form needs to be created, but we will go into those forms here shortly. There's a couple of different options as you're opting to continue to edit your self-nomination. So we do have the option to edit your vendor name if for some reason you do need to edit your vendor name. We also have a manage watchers option here, which is important as at the time of creation of your self-nomination, only that initial security official that created the self-nomination will have access to the account, or those folks that have been granted access to the simplified form. If for some reason additional folks from your organization should have access to the self-nomination form or receive notifications related to that form, you should add any additional email addresses within this Manage Watchers field. That way, you know, for some reason somebody goes out of the office, you know, falls ill or whatnot, they will definitely be able to access in someone's absence. So don't forget to add additional folks into that field. Once we've done that, I will go into to actually edit the self-nomination. Now, again, I've pre-populated a lot of this information just to go ahead and save time for the demo today. If you're a simplified vendor, you will see your information from last year in there. If you're a new vendor that has to create a new form, most of these fields will be blank when you enter into the self-nomination. So we've clicked the edit button. You'll have a form, a field that pops up to give you instructions about the self-nomination. Of course, we'll go through some of this information, but of course, as you're going through the self-nomination yourself, please feel free to review this information, as well as review the disclosure statement. We'll go ahead and close out of that and start looking through. Now, as you can see, there are vendor contacts, there's vendor details, vendor or posting details, all sorts of different tabs we'll have to go through in today's demo. I do want to point out before we go into the fields on each of these tabs is you will see on all of these tabs, as well as the overall self-nomination, there are little icons that are either yellow like this or once you've completed the entire page, it will actually turn green. So I've left a field blank on this just for the purpose of showing you that you can tell this one is in progress still, but you'll see once I complete this particular page how that icon will change. So we'll go through the information on this particular tab. Of course, we have basic vendor information collection here first. You can put your organization name in here. We do know that some vendors will have a vendor name and then a separate organization name. If that is the case for your organization, you can certainly type in a separate name in this organization field. Otherwise, if it is the same name you're using for your vendor name and your organization name, as I just had selected, you can certainly put same as vendor name. The next field is an organization TIN. As you can tell here, I've just got a mocked TIN, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but of course your organization TIN should be entered into that. And moving down into additional vendor information, I named this QCDR, existing ABC QCDR, just for a test name, so that was pre-populated here, and the last 4 of the TIN is populated as well. Your vendor address should be populated, your organization phone number, organization website, in this first section, so just some demographic information there. After that, we move into contact information. You'll see in this section that we do require 3 different contacts from each vendor. We do ask for a program contact, a technical contact, and a clinical contact. We do require that those are separate people. We do have times when folks are, of course, out of the office or leave an organization, and then unfortunately our emails get missed due to email access issues. So we do require 3 separate emails and contacts listed for that. So as you can see here, I have not populated a particular name within this field here. So I just went ahead and typed in a name. So we've got a program contact with a phone number and an email address. We've got a technical contact here with a phone number and an email address, and then a separate clinical contact with phone number and email address. Now, we will list all of those emails and phone numbers on our distribution list, so as we begin to contact folks for this particular vendor, we'll include all 3 of these, the program, the technical, and the clinical contact. With that being said, we have an additional contacts field at the bottom for any additional individuals at your organization you want included in our distribution list. So when we begin communicating future support calls or statuses related to measures, self-examination, anything to that effect, we will email the email addresses you've included in this particular self-examination. So if somebody is not included in either the contacts for the program contact, technical contact, or clinical contact, or listed in this additional contacts field for the 2020 self-nomination, they will not be included in the 2020 distribution list. So please include any email addresses you wish to have included in those distributions of that communications. With that being said, I want to just quickly point out that as I did fill out the last required field on this particular page, you'll see that our little checkbox here turned to a green check and has now been marked as completed. All of these fields have been populated. So we can navigate to the next tab, which you can do from the vendor details. Arrow right here you can use. Or you can also use vendor details over here. You can navigate to the next page either way. So moving on to the next tab here. Vendor details contains a little bit more information about your vendor specifically. As you can see here, we have a field that asks for what type of vendor are you? Are you a collaborative? Are you a health information exchange, regional health information organization, maybe a health IT vendor, regional health collaborative, specialty society, or other? We ask that you just select the best fit for your organization. If for some reason you select other, we definitely request that you specify what type of an organization you are. Then we ask if you've participated in MIPS or PQRS before. As you can see, I've selected existing already here, and I've selected the options. This is the QCDR self-nomination that I've used for the sample today. If for some reason you do select to be a qualified registry in that self-nomination, you'll see PQRS years dating prior to 2014 as the qualified registry existed prior to the QCDR vendor type. So if you are an existing vendor, please select how many years you participated in PQRS or MIPS. If for some reason you're a new vendor this year, you can obviously select new, and then you don't have to worry about that drop down at all. Moving on to the next section of this page, we request any type of alternative names. Whether you're an existing vendor and have used other names in the past, maybe you've merged or just changed your name, any of those names you've used in the past, or aliases, maybe acronyms, anything that could help us identify your organization throughout the years would be helpful with this particular field here. If for some reason you don't have an alias or an acronym, feel free to check the box saying that you're not using the alias or an acronym. Moving on to the next section, QCDR details. In here, we do ask, and I should note this is only on the QCDR self-nomination. You won't have to populate this on the qualified registry self-nomination. So if you're filling out a qualified registry self-nomination, you won't see this particular section here. But as a QCDR, we do ask to see if you are specialty related. Perhaps maybe you're related to cardiology or anesthesiology. This is the field we want to know that information in. So if you are specialty specific, please enter that information in this field. And then, do you plan to submit QCDR measures, yes or no? This one is just letting us know at this time if you do plan to submit QCDR measures. We'll visit later in the process how to actually submit those. If you collect yes, you'll have the option down here to submit those. Again, we'll get to that step in the next process here. If you select no, then obviously we won't be expecting any type of QCDR measures. Same for do you plan to risk adjust, yes or no? And you can hit yes or no. If you click no, then there's no option to submit a risk adjustment plan. But if you do plan to risk adjust, we do ask that you upload a risk adjustment plan for CMS review. So the process is simple to go ahead and update that. As you can see, I've already added an attachment here, but for the purpose of the demo, I'll go ahead and add another one. So simply, you just browse. You can also drag and drop, but we go ahead and just browse, select, and then, as you can see, file successfully uploaded. If, of course, you select no, that's not needed. The next section here, again, specific to QCDR, we do want to know how you meet the definition of a QCDR, as it does take a little bit more expertise and experience to be a QCDR. So as Hector described earlier, we're asking for some of that additional information. So he detailed that there is clinical expertise needed, there's measure development experience needed. In addition, we ask if you are partnering with any type of specialty societies, collaboratives, or whatnot to help you meet that definition of a QCDR. So any of that pertinent information is beneficial to put in these sections. We also ask how as a QCDR you're doing patient and or disease tracking, and then also the methods to use to foster quality improvement. We also have one additional field, evidence of meeting the identified deficiencies. So this particular field here is actually for existing QCDRs. As in prior years, it may have been deemed that folks did not meet the definition of a QCDR for 2020, as again, the enhanced definition does require a bit more out of a QCDR than in prior years. So if for some reason a QCDR was deemed as not meeting that new definition, we ask here for those existing QCDRs to provide the additional details as to why they do meet the definition of a QCDR. Perhaps it's a new collaboration that's taking place. Maybe they're partnering with a specialty society or somebody who does help them meet the identified areas they were deficient in within this. Perhaps maybe measure development experience, and now they've obtained additional measure development experience or whatnot. But please go ahead and provide as much details in this section as possible. So as you can see, I just want to point out I did not get to the green field here. It is because there is a field, a required field, that has not been filled out. So I'm just going to populate that field real quick, and we'll scroll through and just make sure we've got everything completed, and there you go. As soon as you get all of those fields completed, you will see that that checkbox turns green to flag that this particular page is done. We'll move on to the next tab, which is the posting details. Again, you can navigate forward or back down at the bottom of the screen or using the left navigation there. The next tab here is the posting details. I do want to point out that the information specifically included on this particular page will be included in the qualified posting that is published to the CMS website. So it is very important that the information you put on this page is correct for that particular publication. So please make sure in all aspects of the self-nomination that everything is accurate, spelled correctly and whatnot, but definitely with this particular page, since all of this information will be posted. I have gone through and posted a couple of samples here, but we do just want to point out a few of the things. So cost information, I will note that we do ask for your cost information, as well as if it's per clinician, per group, and then what's the frequency of it. So per year, or per instance or whatnot. We have a lot of vendors that do charge using different mechanisms, so we understand that yours may be different than what I've got listed here. That's perfectly fine as long as you contain the detailed information regarding the per clinician, per year, how often that does apply. Moving on to the next field here is related to that cost, in that what you guys offer that's related to that cost. So $1,800 per year, does that include data collection, calculation, submission, feedback, and so on? You can definitely detail this out to include whatever type of services your vendor provides in that cost that you're charging to your clients. The next field here is the last day to accept new clients. We understand that all the vendors have different timelines associated to their data collection, calculation, submission. So we want to post for the clients when the last day you plan to collect data is. Being that the end of the performance period is December 31st of 2020, I'm just going to select something like January 31st of 2021. We understand that some folks may have dates in 2020. We understand that some folks may have dates further than that. As long as you as an organization can, of course, support those clients and continue to submit true, accurate, and complete data, we do not specify when you guys need to stop accepting new clients. So just let us know. That way we can post that information, and after you've reached that deadline, the clinicians would obviously know that you can accept new clients after that particular day. Moving on to the next section would be the reporting information that you support. The first one here is data collection methods. Now you can select any of these, one of these, whatever your particular organization will support. Some vendors just collect data through one mechanism, where others will use a multiple options to collect data. Again, we don't specify how you have to collect the data. We just need you to tell us how you do plan to collect the data. The next question is performance categories reported. As you can see here, quality is already selected, and it's grayed out as you do not have the option as a qualified registry or a qualified clinical data registry, QCDR. You don't have the option of whether or not you can support quality. It's actually one of the things that comes along with being one of our qualified vendors. So if you're a qualified registry or a QCDR, you'll automatically be supporting quality there. Additionally, then, you have the option to support improvement activities or promoting operability, or you can just stick with quality. Again, whatever you want to select is fine with us. I will say that if for some reason you are supporting improvement activities or promoting interoperability, we do ask that the improvement activities and promoting interoperability tabs also be completed as you complete your self-nomination. We'll get to those tabs here shortly. The last item on this particular tab is the reporting options supported. This is just asking if you are planning to support individual eligible clinicians or groups and or virtual groups. We don't require that you do one or the other. You obviously have to select one checkbox there or all. Whatever combination you guys want to do is fine. If you do select virtual groups, we do ask you to provide the virtual group specialty parameters. So you can certainly provide that information there. If you want to support all specialties, as it lists here, you can certainly support all activities. Okay, as you can see, we've completed the posting details page. We'll move on to the attestations. All right, the attestations are a few things that we ask of you to basically attest that you plan to meet as a qualified vendor for the 2020 performance period. As a vendor, I would highly recommend you to review all of these bullet points at the top of this, as it does indicate that you're planning to submit the certification statement that's required, comply with any data submission requirements, complete the data validation plan, as well as data validation execution report, and of course comply with the performance category feedback reports. Hector just detailed some of that information in his presentation, so I won't go through it step by step, but definitely familiarize yourself with those policies to make sure that you do attest that you can meet those as an organization. If you can meet the above requirements, then we do ask you that the submitter sign their name in this particular field here to indicate that you are attesting to meet those requirements. We also have a few additional self-attestations right below that section, and we've actually included a few radio buttons to make sure that you do attest yes. So, of course, there is a yes and a no option, but if you are selecting no on any of these, you do not meet the requirements to participate as a qualified registry or a QCDR, so your self-nomination would likely be rejected. So what we'll be looking for as we're reviewing the self-nomination attestation section is that you, as a vendor, have selected yes on all of these, and that indicates that you do attest to meeting those or complying with those requirements. The first one here is that you attest as a QCDR that you'll attend all mandatory support calls inclusive of the QCDR kickoff meeting or, of course, qualified registry meeting. If for some reason you, the person who's submitting the self-nomination, cannot attend, then of course you'll ask another team member to attend in your absence. The next one here is that you attest that you have had previous experience collecting and transmitting data through a registry-type platform and can meet the submission needs from a technical perspective. The next one is, I certify to the best of my knowledge that all of the submitted information is true, accurate, and complete, including the acceptance of the data exports directly from an EHR or other data sources. If I become aware that any submitted information is not true, accurate, and complete, I will correct such information promptly. I understand that knowingly omitting, misrepresenting, falsifying any of the submitted information can result in punishment by criminal, civil, and administrative penalties, including fines, civil damages, and imprisonment, which is another thing. Hector has referenced these in his presentation earlier, but as these are very important, we want to make sure we highlight them in the self-nomination as well. The next one is attesting that you have at least 25 participants by January 1st of the year prior to the applicable self-nomination, prior to the applicable performance period. As referenced previously, these participants don't need to be using the QCDR to report CMS data, but they do need to be using the QCDR or qualified registry if you're doing a qualified registry self-nomination for quality improvement. Additionally, it says that documentation will be provided to CMS upon request. In addition, as a QCDR, we will have our approved QCDR up and running and able to accept data from eligible clinicians, groups, and virtual groups starting on January 1st of the performance period. The next attestation says that I attest that I understand as a QCDR, I must identify, track, and submit which clinicians are interested in participating in MIPS and have chosen to opt in to participate in MIPS at the time of data submission. The next is I attest that I understand the QCDR qualification criteria and program requirements will meet all program requirements, such as providing timely feedback to clinicians and submitting timely data validation execution reports to CMS. Second to last one is I attest that I understand as a QCDR that failure to meet the qualification criteria and compliance with the program requirements may result in my QCDR having remedial action taken against my QCDR or terminated as a third-party intermediary from participation in MIPS. And the final attestation here is I attest that I understand that a third-party intermediary principal place of business and retention of associated CMS data must be within the U.S., and by attesting to the statement, our QCDR's principal place of business and retention of associated CMS data is within the U.S. So again, those are all requirements for participating as a QCDR. The qualified registry self-nomination has the same attestations, but of course where the attestations say QCDR, they reflect qualified registry. So you'll see the same on the qualified registry side. As you can see, we've completed that tab, so we'll move on to improvement activities. Again, if within the posting details tab you did indicate you're planning to support improvement activities, we do ask that you complete the improvement activities tab. I will note quickly that at this point in time, the calendar year 2020 physician fee schedule final rule is not available, and of course that is what finalizes the list of improvement activities. Oops, I apologize there. List of improvement activities for inclusion or removal for the 2020 performance period. All qualified registries as well as QCDRs that do pass the self-nomination period will be given an opportunity to update the qualified posting or review it once that final rule is available and finalized to make sure that the improvement activities that you had initially selected during self-nomination will be still supported based on what is finalized in that rule. So, as we indicated that we do want to support improvement activities, we will populate this tab. Of course, there's an option for none if you don't want to select any improvement activities, or you can select all, which will just go ahead and populate all of the improvement activities, or you can opt to select some. If you're only going to support some of the improvement activities, you can click some and then use the drop-down menu to select any of the improvement activities you wish to support. So I've selected just a few. You can see that once they are selected, using the checkboxes in the drop-down menu, they display up here. So it's a nice representation, and you can QA to make sure that you have all of the improvement activities you wish to support selected. There's also a clear all option, so if for some reason you want to restart your list, you're more than welcome to do so. Moving on to the next tab is the promoting interoperability, and it is set up pretty much the exact same way as the improvement activities. The same information I mentioned about the improvement activities applies to the promoting interoperability as well. After the finalization of the 2020 physician fee schedule final rule, vendors will have that opportunity to review what's posted in their qualified posting based on what's in the self-nomination and make any final edits based on what's in that final rule. This is set up the same way as improvement activities. You can select none, you can select some, or you can select all. If you do select some, again, you can use the drop-down menu to use the check boxes and check any particular measures, promoting interoperability measures you wish to support. So we selected a few, and as you can see, the list of selected promoting interoperability measures are included there now. We will go ahead and move on to the next tab, which is the MIPS clinical quality measures. These are the measures that are formally referred to as the registry-based measures. And this is for the quality performance category. as a qualified registry or a QCDR, you must support a minimum of 6 quality measures, including 1 outcome measure. If an outcome measure is not available, then each qualified registry or QCDR must be able to report another high priority. So we do want to note that real quick so that folks do know as they are self-nominating, they're making sure to abide by that particular requirement. The same applies to this as the 2020 rule will not be available during self-nomination, so once the 2020 rule has been finalized, vendors will have the opportunity to review the measures that they've selected to update what they'd like to support based on what is finalized in that rule. I do want to note that if you are supporting MIPS CQMs, they must be used as specified, so you cannot edit those MIPS CQMs in any manner and should be following the specifications as posted. Similar to the Improvement Activities tab and the Promoting Interoperability tab, you do have the option to select all, some, or none, depending on which you opt to support. If you select some, the same applies where you have the drop-down menu and you can select all of the measures you wish to support. Now keep in mind, you do need to report at least 6 measures with at least 1 outcome or high priority measure. As you can see here, we have noted in the list of measures which measures are high priority or outcome measures as an effort to make that as seamless as possible for the vendors. So please make sure as you're selecting measures that you are selecting at least 1 outcome or high priority measure. To expand that further, I should mention also that a qualified registry or a QCDR has to support those 6 measures with 1 outcome or high priority, like I previously mentioned, but that vendors do have the option to select those 6 measures based on the MIPS clinical quality measures, or there's also the option of MIPS electronic clinical quality measures, which is referred to as the ECQMs. And that's the next tab we actually moved to here. So you can also select 6 measures from this particular tab if that's what you wish to support, if you'd rather do the ECQMs versus the ECQMs. With that being said, CMS requires the use of the spring 2019 ECQM specifications that are published in May 2019. There is a link in the self-nomination period, so you can certainly reference that link for any type of specifications. Again, with these ECQMs, the specifications that are posted must be used as specified and changes are not permitted. With that, it's the same as the last couple of tabs. You do have the option of all, some, or none. And you can select, if you select some, then you can certainly do the drop-down menu to select all of the measures you wish to support for the ECQMs. And then the next tab, I should say the MIPS clinical quality measures and the MIPS ECQMs are the MIPS quality measures. Of course, as a QCDR, you'll also have the option to support the QCDR measures. We'll get to that here in a couple of tabs, as you can see. But I should mention that as a QCDR, if you opt to select the QCDR measures, those can also be used to make up the required 6 measures with 1 outcome or high priority measure. But we'll get to the QCDR measure tab here shortly. Moving on to the next tab here is the data validation plan. Hector did reference quite a few of these elements within his presentation, but we will go ahead and continue to move through these. So the data validation plan details how the QCDR will validate the data they collect on behalf of the clinicians and submit them to CMS. We do ask that you're as detailed as possible when you're submitting this information to let us know how you will be validating that the information you're receiving from your clinicians is correct. So the first one here, how will your organization verify the MIPS eligibility of each eligible clinician, group, or virtual groups? How will your organization verify accuracy of TIN and PIs? What methods will your organization use to calculate reporting rates? And how will your organization verify 2020 MIPS quality measures, QCDR measures, are utilized for submission? Describe the process used for the completion of a randomized audit. I do want to touch on this one just a little bit, as the requirements do say that a QCDR at a minimum will meet the following sampling methodology, which includes a sample of 3% of the 10 NPIs submitted to CMS by the QCDR, which includes a minimum requirement of 10 and a maximum of 50, and then at least 25 of the 10 NPIs patients with a minimum of 5 patients or a maximum of 50 will be reviewed for all those measures. So that's the randomized audit. Now, for some reason, any type of issues happen to arise as you're validating the data, we also require a detailed audit, which, as you can see here, the QCDR, or Qualified Registry, will complete a detailed audit if our validation reveals any inaccuracy. This inaccuracy will be submitted to CMS. So if for some reason any inaccuracy is identified, you need to detail how you are going to complete the detailed audit that's required, as well as convey that information to CMS. And then this last part here is I attest for the requirements that your organization has the ability to randomly request and receive documentations from providers to verify the accuracy of data. So if for some reason CMS does request that they need access to the data to substantiate the data you submitted, you have the access to provide that information. The last two tabs here are a little bit simpler in that the benchmarking capabilities, this is a QCDR only tab, so you will not see it on the Qualified Registry self-nomination. But you have the option to say yes or no if you have benchmarking capability. If you do have benchmarking capability, we do ask that you provide the benchmarking plan. I just have a sample here I'll upload just to make that green complete. And then we do have the QCDR measures the same. If you selected that you were planning to submit QCDR measures, we'll be looking here to identify if you do have the QCDR measure template, which we'll review here shortly, and then any approval that may be required associated. So we'll go ahead and I will just upload a sample file here real fast. This is not the template that you'll be seeing in a few minutes, but rather just a quick sample for the purposes of the demo here. So we've selected that we will be using QCDR measures, and we've uploaded our attachment. The next question here is, are you using measures from another QCDR, yes or no? If you are using other QCDR's measures, you do need to prove with documentation that you have necessary permissions to do so. If you don't, and they are your measures, completely owned by you, then you can go ahead and select no. That there takes us to the end of the self-nomination form itself. But with that, you can see we forgot to fill out one particular field here. So I'm going to go back, navigate to that, and it looks like I just had one field remaining. Once you type in all of it, you see that this submit for review is now available. So once everything is populated, you can click that submit for review. If for some reason you have your self-nomination partially done, you're not quite ready for it to be submitted, then you can go ahead and hit save and close right here, and you can come back to it at a future date to go ahead and continue working on it. Since we have ours completely filled, I'm going to go ahead and hit submit for review, and then you'll see that there is an extra button here just confirming you want to submit it. Once you do submit the self-nomination for review, it'll turn into a in self-nomination review status, and then the CMS and PIMS team will begin reviewing the self-nomination for any information to ensure you meet the requirements to participate as a QCDR or a qualified registry. If anything is needed within your self-nomination, we will definitely let you know. And there's a comment box, as you can see from what I just clicked. Let me just go back out here to show you. Right underneath your self-nomination here, it says View Latest Comment. You can come out here and see test comments that I've added in here, but if for some reason we need a field updated, we will go ahead and add comments in this particular comment field to let you know what is needed. I will note there is a sort option, so if we need general information, self-nomination information, qualified posting, QCDR measure specification, posting, anything to that effect, we'll label it so you can certainly see what exactly we're looking for. If you'd like to make a comment for us, you can certainly include that in the add comment field here as well. Now, if for some reason you're in your self-nomination and want to access your comment field, Yeah, so the comments box is always on the right side of your screen, so you can certainly leave a comment for us if you'd like to do so as well. And just a few more quick reminders. There is the About section up here that provides the instructions if for some reason you do need to reference those. There is a tab for resources. They are not posted at this particular time. They will be posted in the near future, but they will be available on the Quality Payment Program Resource Library. Additionally, if for some reason you are wanting to see kind of the process of reviewing the self-nomination, that workflow is also available. So with that being said, that's the conclusion of the self-nomination demo, and I will turn the call back over to Jocelyn to start with some QCR measure information.
Okay, thank you. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this is, we're just going to touch upon the QCR measure submission template. Next slide. All right, QCRs submitting the QCR measures will need to submit their measures for consideration using the 2020 QCR measure submission template. If you do upload a version or a template that's not in our particular format, we will send that back and ask that you use the standard template provided. There are a couple suggestions you should consider prior to submitting your QCR measures. As Anastasia noted, you need documentation of permission to use QCR measures, and this must be attained prior to the submission of your QCR measures containing, they should remain in a work in progress, not ready for PIMS review until documentation or permission is obtained. And then for those measures that you are borrowing or using, you do not have to fill out the entire measure submission template. We'd ask that you provide either QCR measure ID. There are instructions on how to do that within the QCR measure submission template, but we'll touch upon that once we open the actual template. So, and then previously approved measures can be withdrawn from consideration by updating the QCR measure status to withdrawn. So if anything was provisionally approved or approved, vendors in good standing will receive a pre-populated template with the 2019 measures, and if you choose not to support that or not move it forward, whether it was topped out or the guidelines changed, we'll just ask that you withdraw that submission. All right, next slide. And as I had mentioned, pre-filled templates will contain blanks for columns that have new or where we're requesting new information. And we just ask that you do perform a internal quality assurance as you review the QCR measures. You verify that the standardized language is used. There's drop downs for selections. And if a QCR measure has a change that does not impact the intent of the measure, it is important to note that so that when we review that, we're not searching for an extra space. We do do a deeper dive when reviewing every QCR measure to ensure that the intent hasn't changed or that performance data can be compared from prior years. We would ask that you verify the meaningful measure area selected and it meets the intent of the area as applied to your QCDR. We ask that you verify all the measure analytics to be correctly applied. Oh, and my computer just died. Alrighty, so then we'll go to the next one, QCR notes, and there is a new QCR note column to be used to communicate any pertinent information that you don't have any other, or that's sort of outside of any other columns. You may have heard us mention that on preview calls, but this would outline maybe notes on harmonization or any of the other updates. Lastly, we would ask that you perform a spelling and grammar check and to make sure that all the corrections have been made. Okay, and we'll go to the next slide, and I think I will be showing my screen to go through the the actual measure specification template.
And bear with us just a moment while we're pulling that up. There was one thing I did forget to mention as we were starting the self-nomination demo. I did mention that the HARP account is required, but I do want to mention that the HARP accounts, if you do not have one, can, depending on your particular situation, take a little bit of time. So we do recommend that you start obtaining those as early in the process as possible if you do not have an account already. So don't wait to get one of those accounts. And looks like we are up and running.
Yep, all right, thank you. So as you are filling out your QCDR measure submission template, you'll notice there's 3 tabs, the first being the instructions. Next, the QCDR information that will just have your organization name, your vendor ID. If you are a 2019 vendor, we'll ask you to put that in there, or it'll be pre-populated. And the number of measures you're submitting. I will go back to the actual instructions. This is the only template that should be used. As I had mentioned, we will return any templates that are submitted that are outside of the this format. And a QCDR may submit a maximum of 30 QCDR measures for review and approval. If you do, by chance, submit 35 or anything above that, we will return the template for you to choose the measures you would like us to review. We would ask that you complete all the fields for each proposed 2020 MIPS QCDR measure and ensure that the measure description and specifications are checked for grammar and typographical errors. As you know, or as many of you know probably, that these measure specifications are published on the QPP website, so we want to make sure that they are accurate. And then when you do upload them, we ask that you submit the template and save it with your organization's name. So we do have a format in there, and we do ask that you update the version each time so we're able to quickly navigate to the latest and greatest. Next, we'll go to the QCDR actual measure submission template. It should look familiar to any of those that submitted last year with a few upgrades. We'll still have this 2 columns indicating if a measure is, or if all the required fields are fulfilled. So the first one is you'll do the measure submission status, and this will have a drop down. As I had mentioned, there's 3 statuses: the work in progress, ready for PIMS review, and withdrawn. And this is that if you had a 2019 measure and no longer want it to be reviewed, you would use this status. Or if by chance you submitted it and you decided at a later date you no longer want to support the measure. And again, if you do not have permission, we ask that you leave the measure in work in progress until you obtain that documentation. We ask that whether or not you own the measure. So your options would be yes or no, and permission obtained and documentation available. Or there is another option for co-owned by 2 or more QCDRs. And we would just require, if you do not own the measure, or co-own this measure, please indicate the actual owner. So if you are borrowing it from ABC vendor, you would just type their name. The next column would be if this is a previously approved measure, what is the QCDR or the measure ID. And then we'll get into the actual measure specification, where you would fill in the measure title, the description, denominator, and numerator. And just to know, all of these headers are hyperlinks that if you need additional clarification of what's required, you can just click this, and it'll take you to the instruction page, and it'll highlight this denominator, and you'll be able to and we provide an example, and so that'll provide clarification. When you're ready to go back, you can just click that back over, and you're ready to get back to work right where you left off. And then, additional denominator exclusions, exceptions, and numerator exclusions. We would ask that you include the data source used for the measure. And we have a number of options there that you can choose from. And then if there's any additional, this is a free text, so if there's any additional information regarding the data source, you can enter it here. And then the next is the QCDR measure type. So this is whether or not the measure is a new QCDR measure, or if this is a new QCDR measure that you've combined, or existing approved QCDR measure with no changes and existing approved QCDR measure with changes. So if you indicate that there are changes, we would ask that you would use the next few columns to indicate the impact of those changes. Let me bring this here. So if this is an existing measure with changes, do the changes impact the intent of the measure? And this would be a yes or no question. And then please indicate what has changed within the measure and how the change impacts the intent of the previous version. And can the measure be benchmarked against previous performance data? And this will be yes or no. So if the measure was changed where 2019 data is no longer applicable, we'd ask that you would indicate that here and your rationale. Next is the NQF ID, and we just ask that if you are indicating that the measure is endorsed by NQF, that it reflects the measure as specified, that there's not a, it doesn't alter or deviate. And then next is the QCDR measure a high priority measure? Yes or no, and then the next column would actually detail the high priority type, whether it be appropriate use, care coordination, or whatnot. And then if it is not, you would just select NA. Next is the measure type. So you have the option to choose process outcome, intermediate outcome, patient-reported outcomes, efficiency and cost and resource use, patient engagement and experience and structure. We do look to see that when measures are submitted, that they are appropriately identified, especially for those that are submitting as outcomes. We do see that a lot of folks choose outcomes, and when in reality they may more reflect a process measure type, so just be aware of that. Next is the NQS domain, and this should be very familiar. You have a number of options there, but we would just ask that you use those drop downs so they're accurate. The next, this is a new column as requested from folks. So this is going to identify the care setting. In our review, sometimes it's hard for us to tell exactly the denominator that is being measured, whether it be a nursing facility or outpatient. So this is just going to help us with that review. Next is which meaningful measure area applies to this measure. So you'll just drop down and choose the appropriate meaningful measure area, and next you'll insert the meaningful measure area rationale. In the next section, we'll go through some more of the measure analytics. So whether or not the measure is inverse, proportional, continuous, variable, or ratio. This section is really important to make sure everything is very accurate. If you say that a measure is inverse and it really is not, it can drastically affect the measure intent and how we review it. So we would just make sure that you double check these, make sure they're all accurate. And if you indicate that the measure is a continuous variable or ratio, what would be the range of scores? The next one is the number of performance rates calculated and submitted. So you would just drop down and choose the number of performance rates. And then you would detail actually what the performance rate descriptions are. So if you had 4, we'd expect that there'd be 4 different descriptions there. And the next column would be indicate the overall performance data that would be if more than one is submitted. So you do have a choice here to select a performance rate, or if the multiple performance rates should be calculated as a weighted average or a simple average. So this is the column. And again, if you need any information on the definitions or anything like that, you can always click that hyperlink and I'll take you over to that instructions page. Next is risk adjusted. You would just indicate yes and no, and just be aware that it should reflect risk adjustment and not risk stratification. I know we've had some discrepancies there. If the measure is risk adjusted, please indicate which score is risk adjusted, and if it's all of them, just provide that detail. And this is another new column for 2020. A new column for 2020 is the measure able to be abstracted. So is it feasible? We've had a number of submissions in previous years that when we request data, or they're unable to provide it because the measure is not even able to be pulled from the medical record at that time. So in order to align with the Meaningful Measure Initiative, we want to make sure that there's actual performance data able to be pulled from the measure. If you do have any data or test data on reliability or validity, we would ask that you'd include it here. And we actually have a couple of new columns. We had requests to add a clinical recommendation statement and rationale, and this would be similar to how the MIPS CQMs and the claims measures are structured, where we have an opportunity to include that. And a lot of previous measures and measures coming in, we would request that you provide the performance data and variance if available. So you may have received feedback from the 2019 self-nomination of a provisionally approved measure. So in those instances, we would require that you provide the average performance rate, the number of clinicians or groups included, and the range. And so this would be the area that you'd want to detail that information. If by chance you do not have that, you haven't been able to pull the data for new measures, we would just ask that you provide a study or citation to support a performance gap if the performance data is not available. And we're getting to the end. So the next one is, please indicate the applicable specialties or specialty, and again, the preferred measure published clinical category. So if it's in regards to pain management, you'll want to include that. And then lastly, this is another enhancement for 2020. This is just an opportunity for communication, whether it be your progress towards harmonization or difficulties, anything of that nature. You can include that for as additional information in this column. And then these next few columns are really going to be after, nothing that you have to take care of during the self-nomination, but we'll use this for communication back and forth during the measure review process. So with that, concludes the demo of the submission template, and I will turn it back over to Hector to review some resources.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yep, next one. Thank you. So if you heard us reference a couple of times resources, we have the Quality Payment Program website. Also, some of you are familiar with the QPP Participation Status Tool, the MIPS Explore Measures tool, the QPP Resource Library, as Anastasia mentioned. That's where the 2020 self-nomination resources will be posted, and we'll send an announcement when they're posted and available. The QPP Webinar Library page, the QPP Help and Support page, and we also encourage you to subscribe to the QPP listserv. That's available on the Quality Payment Program website as we send out announcements through the QPP listserv, or other announcements are also sent out regarding program updates. and other information related to the program. Next slide. And then just to wrap it up, for quality payment program support, please contact the quality payment program at the email and phone number on the listed on the slide. Please know that important program information regarding a variety of topics may be sent from the QCDR vendor support mailbox and or the qualified registry vendor support box. And we also ask that you please send any questions or inquiries that you have through the quality payment program so that they're routed to the appropriate subject matter expert and not sent directly to the QCDR qualified registry vendor support box. And with that, we'll go ahead and open it up for the Q&A session.
Thanks, Hector. Next slide, please. So we're now going to start the Q&A portion of the webinar. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left, but you can dial in over the phone with the information provided on the screen or submit your question via the Q&A box. And please note that we may not be able to answer all the questions submitted, and we will not be answering questions unrelated to the 2020 self-nomination process. And if your question is not answered, then please do feel free to contact the QPP Service Center. So we have a few questions that have come in asking about JIRA. So we won't be using that for the 2020 self-nomination process, and we don't need to submit a ticket.
This is Anastasia. That's correct. JIRA is no longer being used for self-nomination. You don't need to submit any type of a ticket to decommission that or anything to that effect. If you are an existing vendor that is in good standing, your information will be transitioned from JIRA to the new tool for the simplified form.
Great, thank you. And when will this process begin, and when can we get started on self-nomination?
The self-nomination window runs from July 1st. It'll open at 10 a.m. that morning, and it will close at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on September 3rd.
Thank you. And is there a link that we can use to find the self-nomination portion of the QPP website?
Let's see. The link itself, I have not looked up or if that's even available, but I will say that if you navigate to qpp.cms.gov, it's up in the upper right-hand corner. If you click Sign In, then that will navigate you to the correct spot. And when you navigate to that, you can either add new registry if you're not an existing one already, or if you are an existing vendor and have access to a simplified form, your simplified self-nomination form should populate there. And a user guide will be posted shortly with those resources that'll direct that information as well.
And just to add to that, just for all of our stakeholders, it would be helpful for you if you subscribe to our listserv. That will give you notification when all the the QCDR qualified registry self-nomination resources are readily available for your use.
Thank you. And I'll read out one last question. Will the submitter of the self-nomination receive email notifications when comments are posted?
Yes, they should receive notification of that. However, we would highly encourage folks to make sure that they're checking their self-nomination form on occasion, just to make sure that if there is something out there that may have been missed or something was routed to a junk folder, something to that effect, you do see those comments and make sure to address any outstanding items.
All right, thank you, and that is all the time that we have today, so thank you all for joining, and feel free to join us for our next self-nomination webinar in August. Thank you.